Welcome to Business at the Speed of Coffee, the one show by business, for business, about business. Most recently, I've been thinking about the meaning of education, particularly as it relates to our businesses. How do we get talent? How do we make sure that the entrants, particularly the young ones, are qualified to do the work that we need them to do? And is New Zealand prepared for the very uncertain and difficult future we face with changing technologies and social norms? Well, recently I was having a cup of coffee with an old friend who happens to have immersed herself in this work and very much become part of her calling. And indeed is a very successful parliamentarian, the Honourable Nikki Kaye. You can't really go anywhere around Auckland without her name being front and central, as indeed she's been a very successful electoral MP in Auckland Central for many years. She's been a cabinet minister, and now she's the lead spokesman for the opposition on education. Welcome to Business at the Speed of Coffee, Honourable Nikki Kaye.
It's lovely to be here.
Now, Nikki, I know you haven't always been in politics. You're an Auckland girl?
Yes, yeah. Look, I grew up in Auckland. I went to school here, but also I did go down and study in Otago. So I've got a Bachelor of Science in Genetics and a law degree. But Auckland's always been my home, and I'll always
slow down. A Bachelor of Science?
Yes.
And a law degree?
Yes, that's right.
So you're a double major?
Yes, that's correct. I've got a genetics degree and a law degree. So
you've got a science, and that's an unusual and very interesting background. And so it sounds like there was a lot of education in your growing up.
Yeah, I was really fortunate, I think, to have both that university study, but also I had a home life whereby my stepfather was a lawyer. There's always pretty robust debate on current affairs and issues. So yeah, I've been very fortunate to have a great education.
Was study easy for you at school?
Oh, look, I was a little bit naughty for a period. I actually credit, as many young people do, an amazing principal who probably put me on the straight and narrow. I think I thought maybe I would end up being a doctor, but what I worked out is I really love people, and I couldn't really see myself probably spending time in a lab, doing a whole lot more academic study. I preferred to sort of be at the forefront with people, making change.
Now, I can remember when you got into politics, you were at a very early age.
Yep.
There are two questions that sort of fall out of that. First of all, what got you interested in politics? And how did it happen for you?
Well, look, I was a university student. I'd describe my parents as swinging voters. I hadn't had a political background, but someone said, come and meet a person called Catherine Rich.
Oh, yes.
I turned up and it was actually the Young Nationals AGM, and I was elected Women's Vice Chair for the Southern Region, in part because I was the only woman in the room, but also because I knew at that moment Catherine was quite an amazing person, but I also knew that I was a Nat, that I believed in equality of opportunity. And so that's how I got involved. So
from the beginning, let's say you tended to be on the side of the Conservative, the status quo look at things.
Well, look, the way I describe it is fundamentally, if you put a Labour person in a room and a National person in the room, the one thing that would probably differentiate a lot of us is that the Nats are more likely to believe in equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome and redistribution for the sake of it. And I think in part the reason I get that is, I think my parents have worked really hard, but I saw a lot of people that came through the law practice for which you could see those people that were from pretty disadvantaged backgrounds getting ahead, either through education or through strong families. And from my perspective, I could see that was a recipe for success rather than a whole lot of dependency.
Interesting. And so you went to the Young Nats, you're hooked, obviously. And was it the sense of the excitement about politics that got you moving?
For me, it was the capacity to make change and help people. So I have always had a strong social conscience, and part because of some family stuff, I've seen that there are people from all different walks of life, disadvantaged families, wealthy families, where things go wrong. And so I thought, I didn't know when it would be, that there could be a point at which I got involved in politics because that was one of the greatest places to make change.
So the first campaign you ran?
The first campaign as a Member of Parliament was obviously as a candidate for Auckland Central.
And it was against Miss Ardern in those days, wasn't it?
It was first against Judith Tizard. Yeah. So when I first, basically I went in for the selection of Auckland Central because I came home from London and I thought I'm going to give it a crack.
Yes.
I ended up seeing Bill English on one side of the road, McCulley on the other, and I said, look, if you think that I'm not up to it, because at that point I was 27, then I'll get back on a plane and go back to London because I value your view. They were very encouraging. But close friends of mine, including David Farrar, gave me about a 5% chance of being selected,
really,
let alone elected. I went into the competition for Auckland Central. I was up against Jackie Blue, who was a Member of Parliament at the time, and 3 other candidates, one other one, Cam Calder, that went on to be a Member of Parliament. I won narrowly.
And it was actually more a Labour seat, wasn't it, in those days?
Well, I won the selection. It had never been held by the National Party in our history. I won the selection with a view that I told the delegates I'm going to win the seat. And a number of people were like, I don't think so, because we've never won the seat. And it was Judith Tizard. Obviously, she comes from a political family, had been the MP for a long period of time. And so I just went and knocked on thousands and thousands of doors. And basically, I won the seat for the first time in 2008. And then Jacinda arrived within about a year. Phil Twyford originally set up office next to me, and then Jacinda arrived and we fought it out for 2 terms. Yeah,
well, and it's impressive you've been able to hold it there. In those days, what were the highlights of being an electoral MP before you moved up in responsibility in the party?
Oh, look, I mean, I think the thing I love, and in fact, this week I've done a range of constituency clinics, is the power to change individual people's lives. So you can write a letter, whether it's an immigration case or a person who hasn't had access to housing, and you can fundamentally change the course of their lives. There are local issues, so I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. I've been fighting the cause for businesses affected by CRL at the moment. There are other situations on Great Barrier Island, whether it's a conservation park that I advocated and got and delivered, where you can deliver local projects that make a difference, whether it's redevelopments of schools locally that I've fought and advocated for. That is very, very rewarding and satisfying because you spend the time with those people and you understand the power that you've made.
So I don't think a lot of people realise that they see obviously the internal battles that parties fight, and the low moments would be some of the more difficult moments in Wellington and party politics. But then the reward that comes from doing good work for your electorate, and I think that's what the wonderful part of our electoral system is. So when did you start focusing more on the education side of politics?
But I guess the thing for me, in terms of education, why it's so powerful, is you not only get an opportunity to pull people out of poverty, but you also get an opportunity to have a more productive nation. So the ability to do both social and economic work was huge. And so that's what really attracted me, because I think in terms of ensuring that we're a wealthier country, in terms of ensuring that we have less poverty, no portfolio is more powerful than that.
And everybody has a view on it, of course. I mean,
well, that's the hard part with it, is that
everyone's an expert.
Everybody is an expert. The reality is the nature of other portfolios. They can be considered more glory portfolios. You walk into a room, if you're economic spokesperson for National, and there's a lot of people that probably like you. When you're education spokesperson, because every grandparent, every parent, every teacher, every principal has a view. But also we've never really had a conversation as a country about what are those markers of progress for under fives. Now, a lot of people in education would know that instinctively. Can a child regulate their behaviour? Are they creative? Can they form social relationships? Can they speak and listen? Because if they can't,
they're not going to do well at school, are they?
That's right. So we're keen to have that conversation about how we might ensure we pick up. For instance, we've got early intervention services now. Yeah. Firstly, there's at least 20% of children in New Zealand that have some complex need, behavioural, mental health, dyspraxia, autism.
What was that percentage again?
Around 20%. We estimate.
20%?
Yep. Look, other countries, some people would, this is a broad view, mental health, behavioural dyspraxia, autism. Some people will estimate that it's somewhere between 15 to 20%. But there is a lot more that we can do, and we will be talking about that in our education discussion document. But the other part, which you're absolutely right on, is how do we ensure every child is pushed to be able to progress further. And one of the things, I was Minister of Education for a very short period, 3 months, I brought in a change which was to shift from national standards to something called progress reporting. So what that means is that those children that might be able to excel or push further are encouraged to do so, because we don't just think of a standard at a point of time in terms of literacy and numeracy. We're actually pushing those children on personalised plans to be able to achieve more. And so I think this concept that we need to shift from an education system that is sort of one size fits all to personalised learning plans where children are pushed ahead and we have more opportunity than ever before with technology to provide them resources to be able to do that. But we do need to put more support around that to make it happen.
It's my observation, just purely as a businessman's point of view, that the bright ones who are highly motivated themselves, we see them, some of them are amazing, these kids. They've got, like you have 2 degrees, sometimes they speak 2 and 3 languages. I mean, they're on their way and they're going to do well no matter what happens. But, for the vast number of businesses who are just looking for somebody to come and do a job, many of the kids just don't seem to be ready. Now, one of the things I've worked on is this Pathways to Employment program. We've partnered with Comet and we've got this sort of license to work thing, which is now getting some currency. But lamentably, A, there isn't enough money for everyone to have it, and B, there seems to be a lack of expertise in the vocational guidance of the ones who aren't at the top end. They're at the middle to the lower. What's your view of doing something about that?
We'll make a few comments. The first thing is, if you look at what the OECD says around high-performing education systems, one of the first things they do is they would argue you have to start from a belief that every child can do well. And I actually believe that.
Really? Is it?
Yep. You start from a belief that every child can do well if you put the supports around them. And that is a fundamental shift, in my view, for New Zealand. And I think part of it is we haven't actually invested in some of the needs around complex, children with complex needs. So that's everything from, as I say, greater support in terms of dyspraxia, autism, the foundations of literacy. We've slipped from, in 1970, being the best in the world to number 32nd. So
how did that happen?
Well, I think there's some strong views, and we're about to probably go into a big debate about the way that we teach reading. Some people have provided reading recovery, some schools have dipped out of that, so there's a whole debate around literacy and how we teach that. But I think this issue of if we start now, how we would change our system from a very young age to ensure that all children have good brain development, are emotionally ready, are good communicators, can push themselves ahead, have the foundations of numeracy and literacy, are problem solvers, critical thinkers. We've got some views about how you'd change the system to do that.
Not another review.
No, actual plans, right? Actual plans, actual interventions. But the part that you identify, which is important, is separate to that. We've had an education system which has been careers advisors in schools. If you're lucky in a particular industry, in a particular area, you might be able to meet with a cluster of schools, get a better pathway for kids to come into your industry. There's some great models across New Zealand, but we haven't had scale. What National did was we bowled Careers New Zealand, put it within Tertiary Education Commission. But what we'll be talking about over the coming months is National's view about how we need to provide more work experience opportunities younger. We need to have more individual career plans. We need to ensure that young people, there's a greater connection between industry and schools, because it's really difficult. If you're in the regions, for instance, you're not a large business, to have to go and liaise with 25 schools. So that ability to make it easy for industry to engage with clusters of schools and to have a better match about where the jobs are and where local jobs are.
That sounds like capability building in the education system and actually putting in functions that don't exist today.
Well, what we do have, which is a big difference than a few years ago, is kahoiako, communities of learning. Okay. So we've got a mechanism now that where clusters of schools come together and they lift achievement. But that's developing and evolving, and I would argue there's more of an opportunity to have a central entry point for industry to engage with clusters of schools. It does happen in some parts of New Zealand, but the ability to do that a bit more on scale, so that we have more programs for young people to have work experience, which if you look at other countries, I think they do that better. You know, they have the ability for
Well,
kids.
in some countries, you're not going to get a job anywhere unless you've done some form of work experience. One of the observations I have is it seems to me that we tend to fill, or be able to fill the universities. Universities in the bright students are terrific. But the trades are a bit of a problem, and now I'm appalled to see how poorly performing financially the polytech sector has been, to the extent, and now there's a proposal out there to have the super agency. One wonders where that's going to land. I mean, somebody to do something about the thing financially, I accept that. But the main problem is not, I mean, they would be succeeding financially if enough young ones were going into them. Is that right?
Well, let's just talk about vocational reform generally. So here's the problem. There has been viability issues around the polytechnics. Not every industry training organisation has been perfect. But we would argue, instead of dealing with those issues, the Minister's taken an ideological, centralised approach. He's creating a mega merger of all of the polytechnics in New Zealand, and he's bowling industry training and putting it into
this one,
this single mega merger. That is an extreme response to what have been some issues, and it's ideological, and it's going to cost potentially, Kim, 400 million. Wow. That's Treasury's.
But isn't it costing that anyway because the places are going broke?
No, I would argue if you look at this is what some people have put up. They would have said there were some institutes that were not viable. You could have argued for some mergers, but the reality is, let's take one of those institutes, SIT. That has breathed life into
Inter. We all know that.
It's had 35 million of community assets that have been built up. They've been a successful model. They've got people coming from all around the world. Why would we bowl them? So National's view is we've got some bottom lines here. One is we believe in keeping those community assets locally. The second is we believe in local decision making because actually those institutions are best placed to know because they're closer to industry, what's best for their regions. But we do think there is an ability to have greater shared services, greater standards across education. But the Minister's taken a very extreme centralised approach.
I mean, like you can understand the issue. You have the Unitech, which was in financial difficulties, but not all the polytechs were performing poorly. But regardless of how they are doing financially, they do make a big contribution to the business community, and so. My concern is that if this mega thing happens, that there'll be plenty of places where there will be no access to the training for tradespeople because that course you've got to go out of town to get it, and you're suddenly going to lose certain skills. Is that not inevitable? Yeah,
well look, I think that's certainly a risk, but also, I mean, this mega merger on the Treasury's own figures is going to provide potentially less training, a whole lot of job losses, a whole lot of cost. But then the other point that I'd make is let's look at NMIT, right? I went down and I had lunch with them with Nick Smith a while ago with a number of business people who are involved with them. They've done very well around marine and aviation because they've developed these courses locally. They haven't been developed by a group of officials in Wellington. So what I really worry about is that ability to have local innovation, education delivered in conjunction and partnership with industry. Of course, there were some viability issues, but we've got a sledgehammer approach here by the Minister, and it is completely ideological, and it's going to be greater centralisation, it's going to cost more, lead to less training.
How certain is this mega thing to happen?
Well, we have a piece of legislation that has landed in Parliament yesterday, so the question is what they can actually get done prior to the election. Now, some people would say to do the full scale of reforms, it could take 3 to 5 years. So I think we'll be campaigning next year of 2020. They might get the institute merged at one level, but some of the bigger structural changes won't be able to happen before 2020, and it'll be a big campaign issue.
If you were to make it into Parliament and they had succeeded in putting the wrecking ball to what we've got, would you dismantle it again?
We would dismantle aspects of it. So what we've said is we would ensure communities got their assets back, right? So that's really important to us. we would ensure that there was local autonomy of decision making in education. So again, it depends where they've got to, but we will restore that back.
Yeah.
And then there will be a question about separate legal entities. So this idea that there could be separate legal entities at the local level is important to us. Now, they may end up there with their subsidiary idea, but those are sort of our three things that we'll do. So if they've gone completely separate, single entity, taken away the assets, taken away course local decisions, then we will be dismantling aspects of it. But we want to be reasonable. We don't want to just do things for the sake of it. So we'll travel along those three principles, but we're not just going to take things away that might be working.
Now, this is going to seem a bit tangential, but I think it's very relevant to business. It's a matter of drugs.
Yeah.
Alcohol, yes, but mainly drugs is a serious, we know, corrupting influence in society in general. But there's a big debate on right now about whether we legalise or decriminalise marijuana. And probably in the end, the institutions are going to be affected most by that is the education part of it. And certainly, from an industry point of view, it concerns me, is I don't believe it should be a criminal offence to use marijuana. But on the other hand, if I've got heavy machinery, what is impairment? All of those sort of issues about impairment. Where do you land with this?
So
Nikki?
normally on most issues, except for this, I'm very liberal, right?
Okay.
So I voted for decriminalising abortion.
Yes.
I voted for end-of-life choice for a small
Yes.
group of people to be able to end their life earlier. But what the government isn't putting up is decriminalisation of marijuana. What they're actually putting up is legalisation. And let me just explain what I see the difference is. Look, we don't have a whole lot of people that are charged for criminal offences or locked up for marijuana now, right? And this is recreational.
You can almost blow smoke at a policeman on the beat and they'll
This is
try and...
recreational, not, as you say, people who sell it, right? But there aren't a whole lot of people. But I'm similar in your camp, for which if this is a question of not having the people that are locked up, I'm more liberal on that, right? I actually believe in terms of medicinal cannabis. We put up a potential regime. We've done the detailed work on that. However, what legalisation is, and as I see it, is access anywhere. We're talking hash cookies, we're talking gummy bears. It's basically available and accessible.
A la, what, California or
and even where Canada have
Colorado.
Gone. And look, both sides, the extreme sides of both ends of the debates, those that are completely anti and those that are completely pro, skew the figures and the facts. But where I've got to is New Zealand has high rates of suicide, high rates of domestic and sexual and family violence. We've already got a massive P issue and a cannabis issue. When I look at the research, it is overwhelming in terms of the impact on brain development for under 25s. So if we want to be a dumb nation, then we will move into a situation where we have, in my view, legalisation of cannabis.
But isn't there an argument for getting it out of the gang's control, and so by having some legalisation...
It's really mixed in terms of the research around that. What I would say is we've got to do more around gangs generally, because they certainly are at the forefront in terms of drugs. There is huge violence that occurs. So there'll be multiple ways to crack that. But I do think when New Zealanders wake up to the fact that the government isn't putting up decriminalisation of cannabis, they're putting up legalisation of cannabis. And I think some people are waking up to that fact, because the latest poll showed that it had dropped to about 39% of New Zealanders. I think there'll be a pretty different view on that, because I think this issue of, at one level, we're paddling as a country to say, how do we be smarter? How do we do better emotionally? How do we resolve some of these social issues? And a lot of that is around neuroscience, but also the role of family, attachment, parenting, all of these things.
Introduce marijuana into all this mix.
And we just then want to go and legalise marijuana, and we already have some problems with alcohol harm. Now again, I would argue, if we get the pillars of society right, We actually support parents who are working. We actually say it's really important to ensure that people have time with their children young. We value teachers more. We do go after the baddies and the gang members. We are not extreme and actually say people can drink responsibly. We're not going to lock up a whole lot of people for smoking cannabis. That's a very different country to one that decides to legalise, I think, marijuana at a point at which we've got a whole lot of social issues. That could be a cocktail or a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I do love your passion on this. It's great to see you've very clearly articulated your views. I'd like to circle back before we finish the interview, and if you're not comfortable talking about it, but I personally was deeply inspired by the courage you showed from your health issues. You look terrific now.
Thank you.
And that would have been a very confronting thing for any person, particularly one so young. What life lessons would you share about that experience?
Well, look,
because you came back with such energy.
Well, look, I think the first thing I'd say, and for anyone who's watching, who's been pretty ill or had cancer, I would never wish it on anyone, right? So ask me in a heartbeat, of course, I'd never want to get sick. But you do get an extraordinary gift. The gift of, at a very young age, staring down the Grim Reaper. It means that I'm closer to my mum, I'm closer to my sister. A whole lot of stuff I used to worry about has melted away. And so I feel like I've got this beautiful clarity of vision and lens that I would never have had before, because and more courage, actually. I don't wait to do stuff. I say to people, I live like I've got 12 months, but I think like I've got 40 years, because otherwise you'd be freaked out the whole time. What a wonderful way
to look at things.
And so
You're back doing exercise?
I am, yeah. I'm supposed to do the Coast to Coast next year.
Oh, no. That's a form of insanity.
Yeah, but I think, and actually that's one of the things I'm really passionate about in terms of education and society, is I think, whether I read Chinese medicine or Western medicine, I think this concept of kind of a healthier country, from physical exercise to making sure people sleep, to actually eating well, all of these things, if we all kind of did that, I think we'd have less social issues, we'd be happier. And so I'm pretty passionate about that as well.
Well, you've obviously got a very positive mental attitude, and that makes a huge difference to your health, anybody's health, I know that. Yeah,
but look, I mean, like anyone, I have bad days. I know that if I don't go out for, my ex-boyfriend used to say this to me, if I don't go out for a run or a walk, then I'll be more grumpy.
We don't want a grumpy Nikki.
Yeah, I know. So I always have to you got to try and prioritise that.
Well, Nikki, I know that you and your group have got your eyes on the next election.
Yes.
It's really pleasing to see such a broad vision that you have for education. It's such an important investment that we all make in society. I want to wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing you carrying through on these very important ideas. So,
thank you.
Nikki Kaye, thanks for being on Business at the Speed of Coffee.
Thank you very much. Thanks.